and doing a listing presentation, qualifying the buyer, doing a listing presentation. You could get a question on the state test that says you are qualifying the buyer. And you could be saying to yourself, what are they talking about? I never was qualified. Okay? I never qualified someone. You might get the question, you're out on a listing presentation and you're not sure what that's all about. Okay? They could have written a question that said, what do you have to do the first time you're with the buyer? Because qualifying the buyer is the first time you're with the buyer. That's what it's all about. Okay? Now the question would have been easier if they said, what do you have to do the first time you're with the buyer? But the question isn't always worded that way. It could be worded, you are qualifying the buyer, and you would have to realize that what they're really saying is, it's your first meeting with the buyer. And there are certain things the license law requires you to do. Okay? So we have this qualifying the buyer, and we have this listing presentation, which is the first meeting with a seller. The listing presentation is the first meeting with the seller. Now, if you're going to be successful in real estate, that's another reason why you take a real estate course. It's not a bad idea if you're going to buy a house to take a real estate course. Not many people do. They go out and they spend $250,000 for a house. And if you take your mortgage payment and multiply it times 360, that's a 30-year mortgage, okay? You'll find out that you didn't pay $250,000 for the house, you paid $500,000 for the house, okay? And most people spend this $500,000, and they don't take a class first. I mean, come on, $500,000, why would I spend less than $400 to learn about what I'm doing? That doesn't make sense. And I might be at class for 20 sessions and I could miss Dancing with the Stars or American Idol or something like that, okay? Well, you could have bought a book down at Barnes & Noble before you bought the house, but who would do that, okay? So I'm going to try to fill it in for you a little bit, okay? Qualifying the buyer, number one, is synonymous with being successful. Not just in real estate, being successful in life. What does it take to be successful in life? The ability to listen. The ability to listen. The ability to listen. What does it take to be successful in real estate? Not the gift of gab, the ability to listen. Okay? Most people who are a failure in their private life, it's because they don't know how to listen. Most people who are failures in their job, it's because they don't know how to listen. In your personal life, you don't know how to listen. Now, we all have the problem. Something we really have to work on. That's where your success comes from in life, especially in real estate. What's the number one complaint? The National Board of Realtors has been polling people who bought houses. They do this every year. And when they ask people who bought a house last year what their number one problem was, every year it's the same thing. My salesperson didn't listen. My salesperson didn't listen. I can remember saying to a salesperson of mine one time, I said, Frank, did you finally sell the Smiths? And he said, yeah. And I said, well, how many nights do you think you've been showing them properties? He says, I don't know, boss, 30, 40 nights. 3 houses a night. I said, well, he finally bought something? He said, yeah. I said to him, why didn't you show him that house the first night? He said, well, I didn't know that's what they were looking for. You have to shut up long enough to listen. I don't know how this happened because I don't always listen. Okay? But I can remember as a young married man trying to be a good husband, I listened to my wife one time. Maybe I was hoarse or had a cold, I don't know why, but I listened to her and I found out that many of the things I was working so hard to make her happy, she had no interest in. And I shut up that night long enough to find out what she did want out of me. And that was 44 years ago. I listened one night, and it worked. And I learned to carry that forward, okay? Now, some people have a problem. They don't listen because they can't stop talking, okay? I'm not going to say anything about any particular gender or anything like that, but there are some people in this world who talk too much. Now, I'm a person that doesn't always listen, but it's not usually because I talk too much. It's kind of strange because I talk for a living, but when I'm not doing this, I don't talk much. But that doesn't mean I'm listening. I have been known to watch a fly fly around a room. Okay? What do I do when I'm qualifying a buyer to make sure I'm listening? I take notes. I take notes. It keeps my mind from wandering. Some people, the reason why they don't listen is, it's just amazing to me, but how many salespeople never let the buyer get a whole sentence out of their mouth? They cut them off. They virtually say to their buyer, listen, shut up, I don't care what you have to say, I'm going to decide what house you're going to buy. Is that what you're saying when you cut somebody off? You don't want to know what they're looking for, and of course that means it takes you 45 nights to sell them a house, and that's about 10 cents an hour. When you get really good at listening without ever twisting their arm, 3-4 nights, they buy a house. But you have to learn to listen. Now, we were talking about qualifying the buyer, and that's why I brought that up. Because when I get the buyer in the first time, he's usually in my office for 3 hours. And 2 of those hours, I am taking notes. I'm trying to figure out what his real estate problem is. Isn't that why he came to my office? Somebody comes to a real estate office, they have a real estate problem. You can be pretty sure of that, unless you also sell pizza there, then he might be there for that reason. But usually when they come to a real estate office, it's because they have a real estate problem. So the first part of qualifying the buyer is getting them to explain their real estate problem to you. Really, really explain it. Okay? I like to end up with a dozen pages of notes. There must have been something wrong with where they slept last night, and they want to change it. Okay? And we talk about that. I talk about how long have you been looking? And sometimes they say 14 years. And I say, get out of the office. Because I can't afford to spend 14 years with people. Okay?